One day, my dad said to me, "I want to introduce you to my friend." I have to admit I was curious. I never knew much about my dad's friends. He would only mention them in passing, or I would speak to them once and never again. My dad never went into detail about it, so yeah, of course, I was curious. And thought, sure, why not? Just a few days later, I got a phone call. By the way, I was in 7th grade, so I was 13. Let's call him Dean. When he called me, I introduced myself to him and we began talking. I thought it was a one-time thing, but he began calling my dad more and more and asking to speak to me. He was just a few years older than my dad, who was in his late 40s at the time. He lived in New York while I lived in Chicago. He also had his own family, a wife and 3 kids. Despite him knowing that I had brothers he could talk to, his interest seemed only to be with me, just me. And I hate to admit it, but it flattered me. The constant attention from him was what flattered me. I've never had anyone invested in me like that before. I was talking to him as if he was my age. I would speak to him about my likes, dislikes, school, and more. Even though it felt a little weird to be talking to someone so much older than me, I was really lonely. And all I wanted was a friend. My dad also really encouraged me to continue to talk to him, so I did. I really had no idea what was going on. One day, after we had been talking for a couple of weeks, our conversation suddenly got erotic. At first, he'd ask me a question like what size underwear I wore and what my bra size was. Then he said to me that he would buy me tank tops, short skirts, and shorts for me to wear. He knew there was no way my dad, who was a conservative and religious man, would let me wear any of that stuff since he was so strict. And then he told me not to tell my dad about any of this. He said everything we talked about, like body parts and erotic experiences, was our little secret. He instructed me to never reveal to my dad on what we spoke about because my dad would freak out. I knew this, and so did he. We'd just keep talking about this stuff for weeks, with him prompting questions like what I was curious about and if I ever thought about boys in an erotic way. Soon after those conversations, he would tell me how much he loves me and how quickly he fell in love with me. How could someone as old as my father fall in love with a 13-year-old girl? I was oblivious on what love was back then. I would dream about having a boyfriend who loves me and would take care of me. Perhaps it was because of my naivety, on top of my intense loneliness, that I began to say it back. I did not love him at all. I just wanted to know what it felt like to say it. But I felt nothing. The only thing I felt was an overwhelming feeling of nervousness. In the back of my mind, I knew this was wrong, but I continued anyway. I did not know the can of worms that would be unleashed when I said that phrase. As if things weren't weird enough, they got even weirder. Dean told me that if I had intercourse with anyone besides my husband, my dad would end himself. My reaction was instant fear. Would my dad really take his own life if I ever had intercourse outside of marriage? Dean would stress constantly that I wasn't allowed to lay in bed with another boy, or else my dad would never recover from the news he found out. I didn't want my dad to know I was even thinking about erotic stuff. I never even considered doing it anyway. Then, Dean started to mention how one day I would get to see him in person and we would get married and have children. I got so weirded out by this. I wanted to tell my dad how creeped out I was by what Dean was saying. My dad kept encouraging our talk so much, and he even started joking about me becoming Dean's wife. I was lonely and wanted someone to be with me, but this man slid in and stole that spot that belonged to someone else. I did not want to talk to this man, but I couldn't stop, and with my dad encouraging it, I felt trapped. However, more trouble came into my life. After my 8th grade graduation, my family wanted to go to West Africa to stay with my extended family for about a year. I didn't want to go because that meant I would miss high school and didn't want to be apart from the friends that I made. But I had no idea what else the 2 of them had planned for me. During this whole ordeal, my mom had no idea what my father was doing to me with his friend. She was clueless, and they kept it a secret because they knew she would have objected. On the day we flew to Morocco, my dad had to stay in Chicago because he had to work. So it was just my mom, my brothers, and I that traveled together. During our layover from New York to Morocco, I met Dean. My father did not tell me I would meet Dean at all. I really wasn't expecting it, honestly. I froze when I saw him. He was much older than my dad, and I recognized his voice instantly. He was friendly with my mother and my brothers, but he always smiled too hard when looking at me. That expression was full of dark intent. I could feel it. I knew from the look of his eyes that this man wanted me, and I felt sick to think I was looked at in that way, especially by someone so much older than me. Whenever my mom wasn't around, like when she went to get something to eat, or my brothers ventured off for a bit, Dean would come close to me and try to talk to me, but I would freeze. He would ask me if I was excited to travel, that no one else in my class would have ever been given this opportunity to go to Africa. He would say how smart I was and how beautiful I was. He said if we had the time, he would have taken me shopping because he wanted to see me in pretty skirts. He said it would make me look and feel prettier than before. I didn't know what to do, and I didn't want to cause any trouble for my mom, so I went along with it. He brought me my favorite food and candy, but he continued to get closer to me. He even hugged me and rubbed my arm for a little too long when it was time for me to depart my flight. He stinked of cigarettes. My mind was telling me to get away, but I couldn't. I felt so trapped. I thought the worst of it was over until I arrived in Mali. About 4 months into my visit, I began hearing conversations with my family members talking about marriage and me. Me? I was getting married? When I heard that Dean had spoken to all of them and wanted my hand in marriage, my heart dropped. I was 14! He was old enough to be my dad, and I did not want this. He already has a wife and children, and now he wanted me? All I could think about was him getting on top of me and taking my virginity. As if that's not horrible enough. I already had a deep hatred of my body, and he knew this. To know that my dad agreed to this and was arranging it behind my back made my world turn dark. All I could think about was how could my own father do this to me? All the conversations on the phone came back to haunt me. All the talks I had with Dean and how his entire time he was trying to get to know me, making the conversations turn erotic and mentioning how we would make beautiful children. It made me sick to my stomach. I began to hate my life, hate my family, and hate Dean. But mostly, I hated my father. I wanted nothing more than to be gone. After that, there were many other things that happened that almost landed me in a wedding ceremony with this man. At one point, his nephew came on a motorcycle to take me away. I remember vehemently objecting to his marriage, saying over and over again that I did not want anything to do with the marriage. My aunts and uncles tried so hard to convince me to accept the marriage. They would say it's good to have a man take care of me for the rest of my life. But I just kept saying no. I told them that I just wanted to go back to Chicago with my friends, graduate high school, and go to college. I had plans for my future. I did not want to marry this man, nor have children with him. If I did, my dreams would end. My mom eventually found out and objected to the marriage between me and Dean. She was a driving force behind everyone dropping the subject, but that did not leave me free of scrutiny from the family. You see, every girl in the family got married between the ages of 13 to 16. It was also acceptable for a man to take more than one wife if he chose to. Even my mom was married when she was 13. And look at how she turned out. According to them, if I wasn't married off at that age, then I would become spoiled. The remainder of my stay in Mali was nothing short of harmful. I ended up staying in Mali for 2.5 years due to finances. It was expensive for my dad to buy tickets for 4 people back to the States, but when I turned 16, I was finally able to return. However, I unfortunately had to meet Dean again because of another layover when I was going back to the States. Once again, my dad arranged it all behind my back. He made sure that my mom left Mali early to renew her green card so that it was just my brothers and I traveling back to the States alone. As soon as I saw him again, I felt nauseous. I was anxious, but above all, I was angry. I was angry about seeing this man again. This time around, I did not have my mom to protect me. I was angry that I had to face him one more time. I was angry that once again, I was put into the situation without my knowledge. But I was forced to swallow my anger and bear it. And I had to get back to Chicago in one piece. He made a comment that I've gotten bigger since he last saw me, and it was great for making children. According to him, it made it all easier. I burst into tears instantly. I couldn't run because I was in an airport in New York, and I had no friends there. There was nowhere for me to run. He told me to stop crying because people were staring, and he didn't want my dad seeing me in tears once I got back. It would make him look bad. I was trapped. Again. When I got back to Chicago, my view on my dad changed. I never told him how I felt about what happened because I was just so angry and upset at him. I was his only daughter, and he set me up to marry his friend who was prompting intercourse with me for months. I stopped eating for 3 days and was so nervous, but was happy to be back in my city. But from that day, when I arrived back to my house in Chicago, I instantly developed a fear of men. But most importantly, that man. I'm in therapy now, for this and other events. I've been diagnosed with PTSD due to the almost being a child bride. Healing has been slow, but I am better than I was before. I don't think I could ever forgive my dad. I have not spoken to him about what I went through because of fear of him thinking that I'm a bad daughter. There is no relationship with him, and I prefer it that way. Honestly, it was quite easy to avoid a relationship with him. I don't talk about how I am feeling with him, nor do I think he was ever interested. He always told me to get over it, and that I should be happy with what I have. There is no emotional connection, and dare I say it, no love. Yeah, he still acts like a father by providing for me with money, food, and shelter, but I do not consider him my true father. We still live under the same roof, and we only talk when it's to take care of household stuff, finances, and my brothers and mother. My hope is to move out once I graduate from college later next year. There is no father-daughter connection anymore, and I can't trust him to be that kind of father to me. It is sad to say that I think about it, but I don't think it will ever happen.
What do you think? Does awful behavior always mask a serious drama? Tell me your thoughts in the comments and share my story with your friends.